leads to release of blood from the damaged corium. That blood becomes incorporated into the growing horn, and as the horn grows down through the foot, we eventually see it as blood appearing at this point of the sole ulcer. And I'm sure most people who've trimmed feet have seen blood splashing, or bruising as it's sometimes called, at this point where sole ulcers develop. In some animals, and particularly following laminitis, you also see an area of hemorrhage at this point in the toe, where the front end of the pedal bone has been pinching the corium, again releasing blood into the horn as it's formed. Hoof trimming is really the correction of hoof overgrowth. So before we can actually start hoof trimming, we really need to know what happens when a hoof overgrows, and what happens particularly to the weight-bearing surfaces of the foot. So if we take this foot and look at the bottom, we can see that the weight-bearing surfaces are as follows. First of all, the two heels. These are important weight-bearing surfaces. And then the wall, the white line, and a small area of sole adjacent to the white line. And this weight-bearing surface runs along the outer, the abaxial surface of the foot, down to the toe, and then along the axial surface to approximately 1/3 of the distance along the interdigital cleft. So the area which is not weight-bearing will be the small centre of the sole here. It's very important, however, to remember that this small piece of axial wall is a weight-bearing surface. We can see that more clearly if we take a foot which has been sectioned through the interdigital cleft and actually look at the axial surface. So we're standing in the cleft and then looking at the axial, the inner surface of the hoof. Now note that this hoof takes weight from the toe back to approximately the first third of the axial wall, but then there's a big arch here where no weight is taken, and then weight is once more taken on the heel at this point. Now these are the correct weight-bearing surfaces of the hoof. The correct angle for the front of the hoof is approximately 45 degrees, as you can see here depicted by my white pointer. Now when overgrowth occurs, overgrowth is really a balance between the rate of growth and the rate of wear. Hoof at the toe is considerably harder than hoof at the heel. So although the whole foot is growing at the same rate, overgrowth occurs primarily at the toe, and the net effect of that is to actually lift the toe. So even if we take a foot like this one, which is only slightly overgrown, we can see that the angle the front wall makes with the horizontal is considerably more shallow. And this is because overgrowth occurs primarily at the toe. Now we can see that even more clearly if we turn to a section of the foot. The effect of overgrowth of the sole is of course to lift the toe, and in lifting the toe the foot tends to rock backwards. As the foot rocks backwards, then extra weight is transmitted to the rear edge of the pedal bone, which then pinches the corium at this point and releases blood into the solar ulcer site. So the pinching not only makes the cow uncomfortable, but also predisposes to solar ulcers. The problem of the toe overgrowth is of course made even worse if the heel is eroded. Because if the heel is eroded, as in this specimen, then that causes a further rotation of the foot. The heel will drop, the pedal bone impinges even more on the corium, and further pain is produced. Heel necrosis, of course, is commonly known as slurry heel. And I think we can say that almost the majority of dairy cows indoors in the winter have erosions of the heel at this point, leading to a backward rotation of the foot. Probably the best way to appreciate the effects of overgrowth is simply to compare our overgrown claw with a normal claw. Notice how much longer the toe is on our affected foot, how much extra sole is present, and how the foot rotates due to overgrowth of the solar ledge. Because the heel is missing and the foot isn't making proper contact with the floor, then it's so easy for that pedal bone to rotate backwards, causing the pinching. You'll notice that our normal foot lies really flat on the ground. It doesn't rotate in the same way, and weight bearing on this foot will be transmitted directly down through the leg and straight onto the centre of the pedal bone. Here's a classic example of an old cow with a badly overgrown foot. Look at the very shallow angle of the front wall, and if we lift up the side of that foot, we can see what a huge amount of overgrowth has occurred here at the toe, and yet as you progress back to the heel, the amount of overgrowth of the heel is relatively slight. The net effect of this, of course, is to lift the toe and to rotate the pedal bone backwards so that pinching of the corium occurs between the pedal bone and the sole of the foot. Look at the extreme overgrowth of this hoof. Notice particularly the upward rotation of the point of the toe, which is considered to be an effect of laminitis. We can in fact see laminitic rings running around the front of the hoof. If we now remove the side of the hoof, we can see the tremendous overgrowth of the sole and of the toe. The toe is particularly bad. And of course it'll take several foot trimming sessions to try to return this to what would be a normal angle of that direction. One very interesting point in this foot is that we can in fact see the beginnings of a sole ulcer. There is here at this point a very small crevice, and beneath the crevice in the horn small flecks of blood. This is undoubtedly the beginnings of a sole ulcer due to the back edge of the pedal bone pinching the corium at this point and releasing blood into the hoof. We've now seen several types of overgrowth, and we can actually start to look at foot trimming itself. I think there are 4 basic stages of foot trimming, 4 basic cuts. Cut number 1 is to actually trim the foot to the correct length. Now the correct length for a foot is 75 millimetres running from the coronary band down to the toe. Now the way that we can actually assess that distance on an on-farm situation is by taking our hand and wrapping it around the claw like that, with my fingers in the interdigital cleft. My index finger here is running parallel with the coronary band, and the piece of hoof that I need to remove is the small area here just beneath my little finger. And you can see in this hoof there's relatively little to remove. I've now removed the excess horn at the toe, and you can see we're left with a square-ended toe. And if we rotate the foot, we can see that the toe is still too high, and this produces a very shallow wall. Cut number 2 then is to remove the horn from the toe such that the foot comes into the upright position. And we can achieve this by drawing an imaginary line from the top of cut number 1 to the heel and removing the horn beneath that line. On the sole of the foot, we can see the white line running down on the abaxial wall until we come to the edge of cut number 1. The white line then disappears until it reappears on the axial surface. Now what we need to do is to remove this area of the sole until the white line once more reappears to be seen running around the toe and back. The net effect of that is probably more easily visualized if we take a section of the foot. And you can see that the correct length of the wall should be a handspan, and the piece of wall beneath my little finger needs to be removed. The excess horn from the toe has now been removed, and the toe is the correct length. Cut number 2 consists of removing the horn beneath a line drawn from the top of cut number 1 to the heel. That will be the line depicted by my red pointer. By removing the excess horn, we'll actually bring the foot